Warhammer 40k Darktide has come a long way since it was released 2 years ago. It rode the success of Vermintide 2 and the 40k franchise to a whopping 108,000 peak players, but the game was in a pretty rough state with only 4 basic classes, terrible itemization and progression, and no endgame content. People couldn't fathom why we'd taken so many steps backwards in what was supposed to be the spiritual successor to Vermintide 2, which had all of these systems figured out. Don't get me wrong, when Darktide released back in 2022, there were things that the game got right. Its tone, atmosphere, sound, music, and gameplay were all really good back then, so at the very least, the foundation of the game was solid. Additionally, the game portrays the Warhammer 40k setting really well. I think it actually does the best job of any 40k game of inserting you directly into the grimdark reality of 40k. But back then, the game lacked content, features, and systems that made it really annoying or difficult to get into, which is why the majority of the game's players left right after the game launched. That being said, over the course of the last 2 years, Darktide has become one of my favorite games of all time, and its current player count isn't indicative of the quality of the game. Nowadays, the game is in an amazing state, and it finally features a lot of the much needed systems that weren't there when the game launched. If you're not familiar with Darktide, let me give you a brief summary of what the game is all about. Warhammer 40k Darktide is a co-op horde game with heavy FPS, action, and RPG elements where you're put into the shoes of an imperial citizen living in the grimdark 41st millennium who has committed some crime against the Imperium of mankind. One thing leads to another and you find yourself in the service of the Emperor's Inquisition, and now it's your job to hunt down and kill demon-worshipping heretics for the rest of your life. In Darktide, you can play as one of 4 classes: the Veteran, Zealot, Psyker, and Ogryn, and since the game's class overhaul and several balance patches, they've all been made a lot more interesting compared to where they were when the game launched. The Veteran is a well-rounded ranged specialist that is all about blasting enemies with guns, which is perfect for people looking for something closer to a classic first-person shooter experience. The Zealot excels in melee combat, utilizing speed and stealth to close the gap and slaughter hordes of enemies with powerful martial weapons, rewarding people who prefer high-octane, action-based playstyles. The Psyker is a space wizard who uses various warp powers to enhance their weaponry or channel the warp into lightning, fire, and force to melt everything on your screen. Lastly, the Ogryn is a large brute who focuses on a slower but more controlled playstyle. Your weapons pack a big punch capable of bullying enemies by knocking them around, or you can obliterate everything with heavy firepower. Each class has a talent tree that allows you to choose abilities and passives that augment your playstyle. For example, an Ogryn can choose to be a melee juggernaut, bullying enemies up close with a massive weapon, or you could build them as a ranged heavy weapon specialist that is able to pump bullets into hordes of enemies and bosses. A Psyker can fully embrace their space wizard nature by focusing on their warp powers, or they can choose to enhance their other weapons with their psychic abilities. The variety of choices available to you in Darktide is insane nowadays. When you take into account each class, every ability, and all of the talents, you have so many options to craft playstyles or builds. This leads to more replayability, longevity, and fun. But that's not even taking into account the gear and weapons that exist in the game. There are 94 weapons and counting in Darktide, and the list keeps getting bigger and bigger as more content gets added to the game. Not every class is going to be able to use every weapon, and some weapons perform a little too well, but there are so many weapons that you'll find ones that you prefer to use just because of their look, feel, or how they play regardless of what the most optimal option is. Once you have your character's build figured out, how do you want to build your weapon? Or do you want to shape your character's build around your weapon and certain weapon blessings? As a veteran, I can run a build that focuses on buffing my whole team's damage while being able to use nearly any weapon that I want, or I can specifically target a weapon like the Recon Lasgun to build around and create a ranged playstyle where I never run out of ammo. When it comes to specific weapon customization, maybe you'll fall in love with heavy attacks and you take the thrust blessing on your weapon in order to do massive damage with well-timed hits, or perhaps you take the flesh terror blessing to get the most out of your critical hits. The point is that your gear acts as a meaningful extension of your playstyle, and it's easier than ever to get the weapons that you want. Just like how it went through a class overhaul, Darktide has had an itemization overhaul, which changed how loot was earned and how you went about upgrading your gear. The new itemization system is straightforward and fair. If you want a weapon to be better, you use it to level that weapon family up, and when you're ready to get the perfect variant of that weapon, you can use resources that you gather in missions to craft and upgrade it. For example, if you want to unlock more perks and blessings for the Inferno staff, level up its mastery by using it in missions, or sacrifice higher rarity Inferno staves for quick and efficient progression. This allows you to empower any Inferno staff that you pick up in the future, which creates a system that removes most of the punishing RNG of a typical looter-shooter out of the equation, and simply rewards you for your time in a meaningful way. With all that being said, let's say you're the kind of player who gets into these kinds of games and you blast through all of the content. Maybe you're the kind of person who spends hundreds of hours maxing all of your characters and weapons out so that you can experiment with all sorts of builds, but you eventually find yourself running out of things to do. What is there to do after you've leveled everything up? What is the end game? Darktide's endgame, Hour level operations, features the maps that you get familiar with while progressing through the game, but adds modifiers to the missions to make them more difficult and engaging. And this is compounded even more in Auric Maelstrom missions, which introduce modifiers like the Nurgle Bless Monstrous Shock Troop Gauntlet or 3-Veg, which compounds tougher enemies and randomly spawning mini-bosses across the entire mission. Auric Maelstrom missions are a virtual playground that make you want to get better at the game. They don't offer any tangible rewards in the form of more vertical progression or making your character more powerful. Instead, the reward in Darktide's endgame is the gameplay itself. It's intense, it's satisfying, and it's just really fun. But let's say that you're the kind of person who needs the game to offer you a bit more motivation to engage with it more, try new things, or you just want the time that you invest in the game to reflect on your characters in the form of cosmetics or something. The game features an extensive achievement system that it calls penances, which challenge you to try different abilities, weapons, and game modes. You're able to unlock tons of cosmetic items ranging from gear to weapon skins, portrait frames, and other goodies that don't affect your gameplay in any way, but are really nice to have. This system makes it easy to determine which players in a lobby have more well-rounded experience with the game, which I find to be very desirable when I choose which cosmetics I equip on my characters. If you're looking for armor that reflects certain Astra Militarum regiments or other unique skins, the game also offers a microtransaction shop where you can purchase these items. It's a shame that these aren't earnable through gameplay, but the cash shop offers a fair trade-off considering that all of the content that has been released in the last 2 years has been completely free. You may be thinking to yourself, this is cool and everything, but what's next for the game? Or is it already too late to jump in? Well, two big things are happening in the near future. The game is launching a new game mode called Havoc, which will give players more endgame content, and Darktide is officially releasing on the PS5 on December 3rd with full crossplay support. Right now is the perfect time to jump into the game. There are no seasonal passes, no pay-to-win features, and the game is priced at just $40 US. $40 for a game that has received free updates for the past 2 years and will continue to receive updates for a long time. The atmosphere, gameplay, features, and value is why Darktide is a 10 out of 10 for me. And with all that being said, this has been Jeficus, and I'll see you in game.